Welcome to the podcast, A Year of Bach. My name is Evan Goldfine, and today I welcome Lillian Gordis, who recently released an excellent double album of Bach on the harpsichord. It features the 6th English Suite, the 6th Partita, and other selections from Bach's deep catalog for the keyboard. This is her third album, and the other two feature works of Bach and Scarlatti. Lillian's been focused fully on the harpsichord since childhood, and as a teenager, she moved to France to study with the great harpsichordist Pierre Hantaï, where she continues to live. She joins us from Paris today. Lillian, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
But first, I'll jump into fan mode for a minute and say that I think you pull off something pretty special in this recording, and that's reflective of your whole approach. I think your phrasing stretches notes and compresses others, and the two hands are phrased very independently from one another, and there's no shame in fermatas or hanging on rubato for an especially long time. For me, it creates a sort of floating feeling, and as I've written in the newsletter, it becomes sort of trance-like, and I get really locked in. I think it's really rare to hear that in a recording. I'd love to hear a little bit about your approach to phrasing and whether I'm picking up on something that you're putting out there.
Yeah, first of all, thank you. I mean, I appreciate all of that. That's exactly what I'm trying to do. I think the harpsichord is an instrument, if you have a beautiful harpsichord, it sounds great. If you have a less beautiful harpsichord, it sounds less good. And I love harpsichords, but it is an instrument that has dynamic limitations and projection limitations, which is particularly an issue in obviously our modern world, where you're playing in relatively big halls and you're playing recitals, which didn't exist, historically at all. The format did not exist at the time this music was written. And so I've spent a lot of time thinking about how to make the harpsichord an instrument that can project as far as possible and as widely as possible. I think the approaches for doing that on recording and in concert are a little bit different just because of the proximity of microphones as compared to, say, the last row for an audience member. But I try to imitate voice as much as possible, particularly like vocal ensembles and the way that polyphony and counterpoint come in and out of focus in the way that a vocal ensemble can do, which is obviously not necessarily the most self-evident thing technically to do on the harpsichord. But that's something that really deeply appeals to me. That's kind of what I hear in my head, especially with Bach, but also with other composers. And so figuring out not just between the hands, but also between voices, where can I have a little bit of micro stagger? Where can I have more or less attack? I think a lot about the end of the note too, which is not necessarily something that came up a lot when I was studying, but the end of the note on the harpsichord, when the jack comes back down and you stop the resonance, that creates an accent too. And so using a lot of substitutions and shifting to get as smooth a sound as possible. And then when you want to create an accent, you can. But starting from this linear horizontal perspective rather than kind of a keyboardistic vertical one, that's been something I've spent a lot of time working on over the last 5-10 years.
What is a substitution or an adjustment on the harpsichord?
It just means that when you play the note, let's say you use your thumb, and then we don't have a pedal. So you can't pedal and then shift to the next note. So you have to use your hand as a pedal. So you might shift 1 and then shift to 3 without replaying the note so that you can move your hand, or you might go 1 to 5. Sometimes I shift not just in order to be able to reach, but because it rebalances your hand. So then the next note, you have more control over both the release of the previous note and the attack of the next one. So I shift and substitute a lot, probably almost an excessive amount. I also have relatively small hands, so if I want to control all of that, I need to. For example, I don't write any fingerings in because it would be too complicated. Like I have to really just memorize the hand patterns and positions of what I want to do, and then it doesn't really matter which finger you end up on as long as you're in the right hand position.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And when you talk about an attack, because you really can't create a dynamic shift on the harpsichord, what does that look like when you enter the note?
It just means you can create kind of a pop when the plectrum hits the string, or plucks the string, I should say. And if you pluck a little bit faster, so with more attack, you're really close to the keyboard, but you're still going to have a little bit more bite. That's going to pop and come out within the texture. So a lot of what we do is how much do you want very little attack, a lot of attack, and then how quiet can you make the end of the note so that the next thing is either very quiet or louder. And I think making that next step to thinking about it with every voice, and I work through every voice by itself and figure out, okay, if I were one person playing this line, what do I want it to sound like? Then I add the next voice or the combinations of voices. I'll do like bass and alto, tenor, soprano, all these different things. And I also sing all the time when I'm practicing. And I found that singing when I'm practicing gives me a really good sense of projection. So like if I arrive in a new venue, I will sing through the rehearsal, which I think organizers sometimes find kind of weird.
You're not going to do this during the show, right? Yeah.
No, I promise.
Yeah.
I promise. But it sounds a little weird. But the human voice is so much more natural in so many ways. And so it gives me a really great sense of like, how long can this note go? How long should this note go? In a way that if I'm just listening to the harpsichord, I'm going to get kind of sucked into where that resonance point drops off.
Yeah. When you're singing, are you singing normally the soprano line, or is it any voice that seems to be the most resonant one in that moment when you're rehearsing?
I am usually jumping around between the lines to sing the thing that I want to hear the most. When I'm practicing at home, I will try to sing through each part as I'm playing it. Obviously, that gets kind of difficult because some of it is not super singable, but I do my best. And then when I'm kind of at that final stage of just repeating this when I get to a new space, I'm usually jumping around so that I'm singing the thing that I want to make sure I'm hearing.
I feel like we're getting really technical here, but I find that it's interesting in explaining how your approach comes in. So when you're thinking about these lines, it's really thinking about four independences with your fingers almost. If there's a soprano, alto, tenor, bass, you have to create the four phrases and lines within your 10 fingers as they're moving simultaneously. So how is that working between your brain and your fingers? Is it rote in the moment? Is it so memorized? But I feel like if it's too memorized, then it could kind of suck the life out of the performance. How do you deal with that dichotomy?
So, I mean, yes, this is the big challenge, particularly in like 3 and 4 part music where it's fully written through. Of course, you have music where the counterpoint is less consistent or it comes in and out of focus more. Honestly, throughout most of the harpsichord repertoire, there's still this kind of golden thread of counterpoint that you're still feeling in all of it, regardless of exactly how it's notated.
Yeah.
For me, I think the danger as a keyboardist is that you can fall back on something that's kind of vertical that you do memorize. It's like, okay, I have 2 hands and I need to just remember kind of, as I said earlier, kind of keyboardistically what I'm doing. And I think that's where something becomes dangerous because you don't actually remember exactly where your line is going. And that's when things start to come apart or lose meaning. And so for me, the consistency of that has really come through. And I don't memorize my music like I play with the music. I would call it like brain memorizing rather than muscle memorizing the actual lines of music. So that's one thing that's really important is like when I'm ready to take something out for concert, that I feel like I really am tracking in real time where those voices are going, which requires a huge amount of brain energy and listening. Like you can't turn off, you can't be rote, there's like no automatic mode that can come on because you'll just lose track of what's happening.
Yeah.
That's something I've also spent a lot of time trying to improve because it's an amount of focus that's hard, of course, to maintain. And the other thing I think that helps me in terms of the rote thing is that I try not to decide what I'm going to do in terms of interpretation ahead of time.
Dude.
So I try to make sure like I know where all the voices are going. I know where the important moments are, but I don't decide how exactly that's going to happen, which means that I need to know the music well enough to let it happen in the moment. And that's something that has really changed my relationship with especially live performance, but also recording in a really positive way.
It does feel really fresh, this latest recording in particular. It feels like it was played through, and I'm sure that there was some studio work afterwards, but I think that's one of the reasons why it succeeds so much. I guess the corollary to all this is that it's a conscious avoidance of sort of a grid-like and metronomic approach. Was that how you learned on the keyboard, on the harpsichord? How did you deal with, especially in something like Bach, with the intensity of the counterpoint? And you can range anywhere from completely free to extremely grid-like and metronomic. How do you balance those two poles?
I mean, I guess I was lucky to the degree that I did start on the piano. And one of the things I didn't like about the piano was playing Bach on the piano. Not because I actually like the piano. Like I love listening to piano recordings, but I did kind of have this experience pretty early on because I think my first Bach piece was a little prelude and I must have been maybe 5. So I was pretty small. And it was this idea that like when you have the theme in your left hand, you play louder than your right hand. And it was this kind of very systematic hierarchical trade-off between the hands. And I didn't necessarily understand how that served what's appeared to me to be the texture of the music. Even though I was very little, I had a lot of opinions about it. So I would argue with my piano teachers. And I didn't like using the metronome, not necessarily because like I had a counting problem, but I didn't understand how having something that's reminding you where the weak beats in the bar was helpful. And so when I moved over to the harpsichord full time, which was, I must have been 9, that there's just less of a culture of that. So that helped a lot. Like pretty early on, I was learning about how to do rubato. I was kind of allowed to explore that pretty freely. And now at this point, I think other things have been helpful. Like I'm very, very interested in music that's older than Bach and older that I can even play. Like all of this 14th, 15th, 16th century vocal music, I listen to that a lot. And of course, you hear the influence of that type of writing in a lot of the music that I want to be playing. And so thinking about how mensural notation works, how medieval music works, how Renaissance music works, has really helped me kind of back away from any sense of this kind of like the doomsday bar line, I don't think about bar lines very much. I try to think about overall phrase structure. But I mean, I'm working on some contemporary music right now, and I will check the metronome if there's something that's polyrhythmic that I want to be sure I'm doing right. But I really never use the metronome. I haven't used the metronome in like 25 years.
That's great. So that older music, or is it like Purcell and Bird? Even older than that?
Yeah, I mean like Machaut, Perrotin, Ockeghem, Lassus, Josquin, all the really, really old stuff. Right. Taverner, and of course Bird, Tallis,
Yeah.
But yeah, the great masters.
I mean, those are, by comparison, much less played today than Bach and the Baroque period and everything afterwards, of course. What are you still pulling out of that? What's missing from that recorded repertoire of the older folks?
I mean, there are a couple ensembles that I think are doing really fantastic work in that repertoire, and that's been very inspiring to me. There are pieces that some of those groups have not recorded yet that I'd love to hear. But in general, there's groups like Gesualdo Six or Grand Lavoie, who are based in Belgium, who are not afraid to add ornamentation, to use singers who have really different voice timbres. I have no idea if this is historically authentic, and I honestly don't
Doesn't
care.
matter. Right.
No. I mean, I don't play the harpsichord because it's historically authentic. I play the harpsichord mostly because I like the way it feels. Like I have a very intuitive physical contact with the instrument. I like that feeling of being in contact with the string rather than on the piano. I always felt kind of distant from it. And then, I think there's music that makes more sense to me on the harpsichord because it was written for it, but I don't have any pretension to understanding or knowing. We have no idea what anything sounded like. We're making it up.
Sure.
Which doesn't bother me, but I think it's important to recognize.
One of the reasons I love playing the classical guitar is that you feel the resonance all around your body. I've never played a harpsichord. Do you feel the instrument resonating back in your fingers at all?
Not as much as the guitar. I mean, I don't play guitar well, but I've dabbled a little bit. It's not quite that level of contact, but you do really have this feeling of like when you pluck the string and the jack goes down, first of all, you have that feeling of plucking. And there's only one part of the key that like plucks effectively. So you have to find the plucking point. And that's an important thing. And it's not always exactly in the same place on every instrument.
Oh, no.
They're all different. All the harpsichords, there are no two harpsichords that are alike.
So you go to a new venue, you have to really relearn the instruments in a way that's not similar to pianists. I mean, pianists have to adjust for the timbre of an instrument and the color of an instrument. Like sometimes it's pretty like bright or dull in certain areas. But with the harpsichord, you're suggesting that if you hit the center of the key, you might miss the center of the plucking mechanism.
Yeah. But I mean, also like they don't all have the same range. So some have fewer keys. Like the biggest harpsichord basically has 63 keys. So some of them have like 58. Some have 2 keyboards, like double manual. Some don't. The key sizes, like the width of the key is not the same.
Oh, no.
Or standardized. The length is not standardized. The shape of the keys and the sharps is not standardized. So you're kind of starting over every time.
But you travel to new venues and you could find yourself fairly vulnerable. Like, are you more prone to like honking a note because the keys are a little more narrow.
Yeah. Or in my case, usually if they're bigger because of the small hands.
Right.
But
Right.
yes, yeah, I mean, that's just part of the game. And I think like as you gain more experience performing, you find ways to minimize the impact of that or to work with it and try to turn it into a positive. But I mean, sometimes you just end up with an instrument that doesn't work and there's not that much you can do about it.
Yeah. So I'd love to pivot and talk a little bit about Bach and your interpretations. So it sounds like you might have gotten the Bach bug when you turned back to the harpsichord when you were young and moving away from the piano Bach. Were there recordings that you were listening to on harpsichord at that age that were important to you, or were you learning the repertoire and then coming to the recordings after that?
So in my family, we had some early music recordings, but I wasn't all that conscious of them. I don't think I really knew which recording was which. In retrospect, I realized that we had some recordings on historical instruments. For example, we went to concerts at the Berkeley Festival that I'm playing at in whatever, 10 days. I remember like hearing Il Giardino Armonico do all the Brandenburgs, and I think I was 6. So this was something that was like in my sound world. I didn't come to the harpsichord through recordings. So I came to the harpsichord really because my first piano teacher had one and I got to try it and I liked it, but I was too little at that point. Like nobody wanted to teach a 5-year-old harpsichord.
Mm-hmm.
We couldn't rent an instrument. So I like stayed a little bit in touch with the instrument, so to speak. I did the San Francisco Early Music Society Discovery Workshop a couple summers, and it was around, but I wasn't getting to play one. And so I guess when I was about 9, I kind of said to my parents, like, I've bounced around to different piano teachers and I'm running into the same types of issues. I feel frustrated. I don't want to do this anymore. And there were other things that I was interested in. I don't know if I considered them like professionally. There was kind of this tipping point where it could have gone either way. And they were like, well, let's give the harpsichord a last shot. And if it doesn't work out, you can take a break for a while. Because I had been playing by that point. I started the piano when I was 3. So it had already been a while.
Yeah.
We got lucky. We managed to find a great teacher in San Francisco named Kathy Pearl, and she had an instrument to rent, and everything just kind of aligned at the right moment. But it's kind of interesting because I, for the first number of years, had no awareness that there was a harpsichord community outside of the Bay Area. So there'd be concerts that I would go to. My teacher had some recordings. Some of the other harpsichordists had recordings, but I didn't realize there was a whole big world out there. And it actually wasn't till I think I was 12 or 13, and my parents got me the scores for Well-Tempered Clavier for my birthday. And then I was looking for a recording because I couldn't realistically sight read all of that. I mean, I tried, but I wanted to hear it. And I went to the musical offering in Berkeley, Joseph Spencer's shop, which had a big impact for early music in the Bay Area in general, because he stocked tons of international recordings. He was very involved with the Berkeley Festival. So we went there to look for a recording, and I kind of happened on Pianotti's Well-Tempered Clavier Book I.
Wow.
I had vaguely heard of him because my teacher at the time had been at the Bruges competition with him, but I didn't really know what any of that meant. I just was like, maybe this will be interesting. So I grabbed it, and that was really life-changing, and it was expensive. My mom was like, are you really going to listen to this? I was like, give me a shot. So I popped it into the CD player, and I had never heard anything like that in terms of instrument playing, recording quality, like everything.
It's an extraordinary album.
Yeah, it really is. And that was life-changing for me. It's just a fantastic recording.
Yeah. So you ended up studying with him,
Yeah.
Not too far from that moment. So
No.
What was it like studying under him? What did he impart to you that your other teachers couldn't?
I think the thing that's interesting about Pierre is that he's very anti-authoritarian and he's almost like anti-pedagogical. And so even studying with him was a very informal thing. Like there was a period of time where he had students. By the time I came along, he didn't really have any students anymore. He did not have a private studio. And he was kind enough to give me a couple initial lessons, but he didn't promise anything. And then when I ended up moving to France, I ended up working with him. But it wasn't all that formal, even though I ended up working with him for like 3 years.
Yeah.
I would just go and have these really long lessons, like all day long. And I would basically call him when I knew I had enough music to play. But I knew the expectation was to arrive with basically a program's worth of music.
Wow.
There wasn't a lot of talking. He would play a lot. But I mean, I learned well by imitation, so that worked well for me. But I never had the impression that I needed to be doing what he was doing. I mean, that he's a great musician. And so at that age, of course, I wanted to imitate and to copy. But it was in a way very unstructured. And I appreciated the sense of responsibility that that gave me. It was on me to do the work. It was on me to push harder. It was on me to figure out how to make the instrument do everything. And I value that.
That's great. And so were you just playing through the Well-Tempered Clavier? What kind of work were you studying in that age?
I mean, the very first lesson I must have been 14 because he came to the Bay Area with Jordi Savall and gave me a lesson. I mean, we covered a lot of stuff. I remember working on the sixth partita, the second English suite, Preludes and Fugues, Scarlatti sonatas, Frescobaldi toccatas. I mean, honestly, like kind of an overview of most of the repertoire between. I mean, I had a couple lessons in 2007 and I didn't live in Europe yet. And then from 2009 to about 2013, I'd say we didn't cover everything, but we kind of covered the big building blocks. And I think the most important thing was honestly not the repertoire. It was like, how do you build yourself a toolbox so that you can apply that to whatever you want to be working on?
And what you have been working on has been really interesting collections of Bach's works. And, I've noticed that in both of the Bach albums that you recorded, for the Well-Tempered Clavier selections, you've recorded only from the second book. And I'd say for most fans, they're probably listening to the first book maybe 75-80% of the time. And the second is sort of a relic. How do you think about that? I mean, was that a conscious choice that you were playing some of the lesser known pieces?
Yeah, I mean, I think there were a couple things. First of all, I feel like because this recording by Rote had such a big impact on me at such an important age, like being in my early teens, I listened to the album a lot. And then I also played through book one a lot, and probably more than book two. And there were more Preludes and Fugues that I worked on from book one as a teenager. I spent a number of years as a teenager without a teacher because I kind of got to the end of the road with my first teacher. And then there wasn't somebody else living nearby that I immediately wanted to work with. And because I was a little bit stubborn, I was like, I'd rather work on my own than go to a lesson every week and feel like I'm not getting where I want to be going. And so there's a whole bunch of music that I kind of worked on too much and headbanged with and felt frustrated by. The sixth partita is actually one of those pieces. And I've kind of come around now. But I think with book one, it was just something I'm not ready to come back to. Whereas book two, in a way, because it's more complicated and the pieces are more standalone, I didn't spend as much time with it as a teenager. And so I feel like, yeah, there are these pieces, some of them are very difficult and strange, and they get ignored. Like people don't necessarily want to deal with them for a lot of reasons. And yeah, I really wanted to get into those for what each one of them is worth, rather than like I don't really want to do the whole book. I mean, who knows? Maybe when I'm 55, I'll be like, I'm going to do the whole Well-Tempered Clavier Book II. I have no idea. But for now, like I wanted to pick out these pieces that otherwise kind of get lost in the bigger picture.
They're a little less tuneful than the first book.
Yes.
And I think that's why for people who love Bach, it's not just the counterpoint. I think that he's an underrated melody writer. And there's such powerful, beautiful tunes throughout his catalog, especially the first book of the Well-Tempered Clavier. And it's underpinned by this incredible counterpoint, which I just find that's like it's the best. It's the brain and the heart together. So I think that's what resonates. But I've been enjoying digging into some of your recordings of the second book. I'd love to hear more of that as well. Scarlatti is another artist who you've recorded. Scarlatti is someone who's been rising in my esteem as I've been listening more to his music over the years. Tell me what's important about Scarlatti to you.
So, I mean, the funny thing about the Scarlatti thing is I played a ton of Scarlatti like 10-ish years ago. I had a program I was doing a lot in concert. Then I recorded the CD. And then I just completely lost interest. And I have no idea why. I was chatting with my producer the other evening and we were talking about recording projects. And he was like, do you think you'll circle back to Scarlatti at some point? And I was like, I'm sure I will, but I can't explain why. But I mean, what I really like about Scarlatti is that it's not Baroque music at all. For me, it's like Impressionist music. It's very visual. Even the way it looks on the page, it's incredibly visual. And you have these very rapid timbre and mood changes that you don't really get in more traditional Baroque forms. And it's just really refreshing. And I found that it was a great playground to figure out what you could do with the instrument. And so, especially like in my early mid 20s, I just was like, okay, there's sometimes you can feel like there's so many rules that you're supposed to be listening to about Baroque forms that it can almost get in the way of your development and your relationship with the instrument. What I loved about Scarlatti is we don't know. I mean, he didn't leave us any information about his music. And so for me, it was like this clean slate to figure out what can I do with overholding? What can I do with attack? What can I do with silence? And that's what I really love about that music.
Yeah, it's a fun album. And there's been a lot of great recordings on piano of late as well. Lucas DeBard.
Yeah.
Recorded about 50 of them on a big album. It's just great. So I'd love to talk about some recordings that are important to you, both Bach and otherwise. Do you listen to non-classical music at all, or is it mostly
a little bit?
A little bit. So what are important records for you in the early days? We heard about Pierre Hantaï's Well-Tempered Clavier Book I. What are other important records for you, both from your origin time and into now, so I can link all of those for our listeners?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so I would say I think that Pierre's work on Scarlatti made a huge impact on me, of course, especially like the 1, 2, 3 volumes. There's so many of them, but I remember the 1, 2, 3 volumes. And that was just about like explosivity. Like, oh, the harpsichord can be like a very explosive instrument.
Yeah.
There were also, I mean, now they feel very dated, but I got to know the cantatas through the Leonhardt Harnoncourt like complete set. I checked them out of the library, and I'm still very kind of attached to the work that they were doing, even though there are all these problems.
They're not great. Those are very problematic recordings, like the boy sopranos. There's a lot of off-pitch singing.
Yeah.
The orchestra is often a lot of it. I can see it's sort of like charming in certain ways and novel, but I never connected to those records. Also, I had the benefit of there were 7 other complete recordings to listen to after them, but you still have a connection.
Yeah, I still have a connection to that. And when I'm talking to my students, sometimes I'll pull them up and they'll be like, why are you listening to this? And I'm like, well, but listen to this thing, because this thing is part of our story and our history. I think generational connections in the early music world are so important, kind of like where you're coming from, who you're going to. And so I think, I connected very strongly with this whole kind of Dutch school thing, even though I would absolutely never do that music that way myself. I think particularly like the St. Matthew recording that Leonhardt did with the Petite Bande, which is a little bit later. And so I think the playing and the singing overall are more successful. That, for example, was recorded in the church in the Netherlands where I record and where Pierre's done a lot of recordings. Leonhardt did a lot of solo recordings. And like you go and listen to E major in the St. Matthew and I hear the colors of that church. Like there's just a very strong kind of nostalgic connection to that whole sound world. Like on a completely different note, I also loved a lot of Rote Saval's recordings. Like that was very important for me. I remember the Purcell Fantasia recording, his recordings of some of the dance suites excerpted from Rameau and other French composers. The Ensemble de Poème Harmonique, a lot of their early recordings, like they have a set of air de cour. That was really important. Things that kind of brought me into this bigger sound world. I remember a lot of those. And then there were also pianists. I listened to Richter. I listened to some of the early pianists, Hoffman and company. I don't have a specific recording in mind, but that had a big impact on me. Just the amount of rubato that they did, of the desyncing between the hands. I found that really interesting. When I was a kid, another recording that made a big impact was the Harnoncourt Beethoven recordings, the symphonies. Like, I had never heard Beethoven sound that way.
Right.
I think we had Levin doing the Beethoven Piano Concerto with Gardner. Just that made a big impact on me.
It sounds like there was a lot of that music playing in your household when you were a kid. Were your parents musicians, or they just love the music?
No, they're just like, and it's funny now. I asked them, why did you have those recordings? They're like, oh, we don't know. I don't know. My parents are funny that way, but they had good recordings. We had Andras Schiff. I remember the Andras Schiff Book II, actually.
Okay.
I must have heard that when I was like 4, because I remember that. And then as time went by, I mean, there are more recently, there have been other recordings that have made a big impact on me. For example, the Bernstein Mahler symphony. I didn't know Mahler because once I got into the early music thing for a long time, I was only listening to that. And now, recently, like the Barenboim recording of the Brahms symphonies with the Staatskapelle, that's amazing. Bruckner, all these like huge symphonic forms that are so far from what I do. Like, I really enjoy that. Ravel piano, amazing.
And who on the
Actually,
Ravel piano?
well, I actually really liked what Luc Bach did with Gaspard and La Nuit, for example.
It's a really good album.
Yeah, it's a great album. I like most of Piotr Andrzejewski's recordings. I really enjoy Alexander Kantorov. Yeah, I mean, that's sort of like what comes to mind immediately. I like Kantorov playing Brahms. That's
Yeah.
great. I felt like I finally understood Brahms. You know,
I saw him do Brahms' adaptation of the Chaconne for the left hand at
Mhm.
Carnegie Hall a couple of years ago. It was really good.
I've only had a chance to see him play once, but yeah, that was a very inspiring relationship to the hall and the sound, and I could kind of relate to what was going on there.
We haven't talked about Glenn Gould, who's a little bit off to the side about all of this stuff. Did your parents have a record of him, and did that change your impression of the keyboard at all, and Bach as well?
Funnily enough, we didn't have any Gould recordings, and I remember when I was working on the inventions, I was, again, maybe 6 or 7, and I think we checked out a recording from the library because my parents are big library people, so we were always at the library. I turned it on and I was like, eh. And that's always been my reaction to Gould. I don't hate it. I just don't connect with it.
Yeah.
And I don't really know why.
It's been puzzling to me that he is so eccentric. I thought that was the way to play Bach. That was how I learned the music initially. That was my entry. And I liked the music and I thought that the playing was unusual, but it's just bizarre to me that that's like the standard recording that a lot of people will enter with this for. This has been great. Anything else come to mind that you wanted to talk about your Bach journey? What's coming next? What do you want to record? Is it the Goldbergs? Will there be more Bach? And what particular pieces are you really interested in taking into more?
So there'll definitely be more Bach. I'm taking a little break recording wise from that because my next recording I'm doing 16th century English music and a little bit of contemporary music that I commissioned. So I want to kind of go in another direction, which kind of like relates back to what I was saying about the recordings that I've listened to most recently have been all this vocal polyphony. But so I want to see what I can do with that with 16th century English rep. And then with Bach, I was literally having this conversation 2 nights ago with my producer, and I definitely want to get to the rest of the partitas. I don't know in exactly what order or when, but those are all pieces that are just incredible on their own. I think at some point Goldberg's, I mean, I worked on them a lot. I performed them a lot, something like not quite 10 years ago, but yeah. And then kind of just, I got the sense I didn't have something to say and put them aside.
I put you in the record in the post that I had of you on my blog, I had it after Young Chen Lim's recordings, which I think fell really flat to me. I didn't think he had enough to say. I think he's got a lot of chops, but I didn't think he had anything artistic to say about that. And there's something like 500 Goldberg recordings available now, and you can keep getting more out of them, but you really, I think probably 2/3 of them are not worth listening to.
Yeah, I think with the Goldbergs, it's like people are attracted to it because it's a long piece where you don't have to construct program narrative to some degree. Not to like, I'm not dissing the Goldbergs. I love the Goldbergs, but I do think that there's something attractive about that, and that's not enough. I learned them pretty early on. I mean, I was in my late teens, and the first time I performed them, I think I was 20 or 21. And that was fun, but I don't want to record them, and I don't want to record anything until I have that feeling that I have something to say. So in response to your question, I'm really interested in Art of Fugue, but I have not figured that out at all. Like, I want Art of Fugue on the harpsichord to sound like Art of Fugue does with a consort, like on the Saval recording. That's so trippy. I love that, but I have to figure out how to make my fingers sound like viols and cornetti and all of that, and I haven't gotten there.
My experience with that live, I heard Daniel Trifonov play that at Lincoln Center. It was like a week before quarantine in 2020, and like there were people coughing in the audience. There's all these people coughing in the audience, and I was already kind of like, this is not good. And it was a very intense moment, and he is such an intense performer, and he just played the whole thing. He took an intermission to breathe a little bit, and then he went through the whole thing and then played an adaptation of Jesu Joy of Man's Desiring as an encore, and then left. And I think he took a nap. It was very, very intense. But yeah, I've never heard it on harps. I've never listened to a recording on harpsichord. Are there many?
Yeah, I mean, there's a decent number. It's not as popular as a lot of other pieces, but it's something that I would like to figure out at some point down the road. And there are other pieces that I would like to spend more time with. I think there are pieces like I played the toccatas when I was a kid. I work very cyclically and I kind of let things speak to me. So when I feel that pull towards something, I'm like, okay, now is the time. But I try not to force it.
And so you'll come up to, so this toccata is something like, okay, this could be the center of the next project, and you'll build around it.
Yeah,
Cool.
exactly.
Yeah.
I think you'll definitely get the rest of the partitas in the next couple of years, and I'll probably continue to pair them. I like making these kind of architectural programs. I find that interesting. I like constructing a recording, figuring out how to kind of give it some kind of overall sense, but also respect the fact that people may not listen to it all the way through. I know that, especially with streaming, people don't. And so constructing something where people can listen to 20 minutes and they may turn it off and they haven't lost the whole like point of the
Mm.
recording.
Yeah. Is it hard to
And
record these things? Like to get the, how do I phrase this? Is it hard to convince people to record these another time?
I've been lucky. The first label I was with, the label was not very involved in the production aspect. They were kind of like housing the recording, but I was in charge of a lot of the production. So I made the first Scarlatti recording, and then I was actually going to record English music, and we had a problem with the space. There was too much humidity,
Hmm.
so the harpsichord wouldn't stay in tune, so we threw that out.
Oh no.
This happens. So after that, I was kind of at a loss, actually, and it was early 2020 because I was locked at home. I was spending a lot more time playing Bach. Like I'd always played Bach, but I hadn't necessarily had time to just spend with these really big pieces. And then I was like, you know what? I want to record the Fifth English Suite. I want to do the Fourth Partita. I want to do this B flat minor prelude and fugue. And then it sort of started to come together. And the label was like, that's fine if you want to do that. Like they didn't really care. And I never had any anxiety about it personally. Like I figure a recording is a moment in time.
Yeah.
And I may re-record things, but I have to feel like I have something to say, but I don't think of it in terms of what age or what stage in my progression I am. I just try to react to my instinct about that. And then now I'm with a different label, and that producer came on board because of the last Bach album. He just loved that album. So we've had some conversations back and forth, but he basically is like, you can record whatever you want, which is awesome. I am
Amazing
incredibly
freedom.
grateful for that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
awesome. Well,
yeah.
congratulations on that. We're looking
Thank you.
forward to listening to whatever is coming next, including this new English album. Lillian's new album is J.S. Bach with a collection of partitas and excerpts from the Well-Tempered Clavier Book II. The French Artalinna label, it's available on all streaming. I'll have it linked in the show notes. Lillian, thank you for joining us today. Go see the concert. It's going to be great.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.